Admiral. We'll start with 2 questions from Brussels, then we'll go over to Naples, and then we can come back here. AFP, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Pascal Mollet from Agence France Presse AFP. Admiral, 2 questions. First one, is that true that according to General Younes, the rebels military chief, NATO apologized for the incident which occurred in Brega because apparently the communications between the rebels and NATO are not very good, and you did not know, or somebody did not know in the chain of command of NATO that the rebels had from now on tanks and they were using them. Second question, about Ajibia. Is that true that NATO did not fly over the advancing Gaddafi troops, while they were rather exposed to strikes in the desert area, and that it's much more difficult, as you know, and as you say every day, to strike troops when they are nearing boroughs, cities, suburbs, where effectively there is a difficulty and a high risk of collateral damage. So can you confirm what is exactly the tactics of NATO? Why don't you, apparently, according to people on the ground, including journalists, strike people that are effectively much more vulnerable before they reach the cities?
Thank you. Can I take the second question first? I think your question was, why are we not attacking forces that are, I think you imply, are out in the open and easier to attack than forces which are directly in the built-up areas? I think what I just outlined there was the fact that we have been ranging far and wide, and I said this in the answer to the question on Wednesday, very similar. Over the last 24 hours and last night, we've ranged as far over as ammunition dumps directly connected and servicing those forces attacking civilians to the south and southwest of Tripoli, along the coast through Ras Lanuf and Sirte. We've attacked air defence sites that have lit up, i.e. illuminated our aircraft enforcing the no-fly zone. So what I would say is we are indeed, and it may not be apparent to TNC forces, to whom we don't have to prove where we are, but we have been attacking targets that directly threaten civilians, civilian population areas, or are linked to those forces doing so. So we've done that in the last 24 hours and throughout the first week of our operation. In relation to your first question, I'm not aware what General Younes has said today or yesterday. But I'm not apologising. The situation on the ground, as I said, was extremely fluid and remains extremely fluid. And up until yesterday, we had no information that the TNC or the opposition forces were using tanks. There were equipment moving up and down the road between Brega and Ajdabiya, going forward and coming back. And our role is to protect civilians. Tanks have been used in the past to directly target civilians, and indeed the other day we had questions and we were examining the case in Misrata where we've seen tanks right in the centre with population areas and people round about them. Thank you.
Europa Press. Thank you. Europa Press, Ana Pizzanero, thank you so much, Rear Admiral. Yesterday, General Carter Ham said that the situation in Libya had gone into a kind of a stalemate. I think he was referring both military and politically. I don't know if the chain of command of NATO shares this assessment, and if not, how are you dealing with this, and how will your tactics change? And I don't know if I can make a second question. Do we still have all the U.S. attack aircrafts in place, or did the reduction already effectively take place? I think it was around 40 planes that they would retrieve from command of NATO. Thank you so much.
Can I address your second question first on U.S. forces? And then, well, I think the first question may come back to you. On the answer about U.S. forces, as President Obama said some days ago, the US forces would start to take a step back. So with the US forces being up here, a large number of aircraft flying roughly half the strike sorties, the number of coalition aircraft has come up, and we're now content with the number of strike aircraft we have. Today there are over 110 fast jet, as I would call it, sorties flying missions over Libya over the next 24 hours. So that's over 110 sorties. So what the US forces are providing is supporting assets to us. and the focus, the main principal number of sorties, is now flown by the coalition. On your earlier, the NATO nations and the partners. On the first question, I think you've said, you're quoting General Ham. I'm not aware exactly what he said, and you're asking whether there is a political or military stalemate. I'll leave Juana to give her own view on that question. But as to whether we've changed what we're doing, no. We haven't changed what we're doing. We're looking at those forces across Libya, and I'm sorry to repeat it, who are attacking the civilian population, threaten to attack them, or are directly linked to that. And that means looking at where they're getting their ammunition from, and also looking at where they're getting the fuel from. Juana, do you want to take the first part of that question?
Absolutely. From what I've seen from General Carter Ham's testimony to the United Services Committee in the Senate yesterday, he made clear that his assessment was based on the change in tactics by the pro-Gaddafi forces that the Rear Admiral was also referring to, the fact that we see all forces driving around in civilian vehicles, very hard to tell who's who, and also the fact that pro-Gaddafi forces are using human shields and are parking tanks next to mosques and schools. So it's very hard to pinpoint any of this military hardware without causing civilian casualties. So I think General Ham made it clear that his assessment was not made on the basis that NATO had taken command. And we've always made clear that there is no purely military solution to this conflict. This is why it's so important to find a political solution, and there I would say there is no stalemate. Just on the contrary, I think there is a clear drive from the international community to urgently find a political solution to this conflict. And the contact group will be meeting next Wednesday, I understand, in Doha. As I said, the Secretary General has been invited and will be there. The whole international communion is united and committed to finding a solution as soon as possible. And the only solution can be a cessation of violence as demanded by the United Nations Security Council resolution, and an immediate transition to democracy as demanded by the people of Libya. I think we'll now go over to Naples for the next set of questions.
Thank you. I'm happy for the next question.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. Paolo Santalucia from Associated Press. I would like to know if it's possible to confirm how many proven casualties, civilian casualties, there have been due to NATO attacks that you can be sure and you can confirm, and what is NATO doing to improve communication and coordination with the rebel forces? Thank you.
I'm going to get a reputation for this because I'm going to take the second question first. Someone's going to catch up with me quite soon and then start asking the questions round the wrong way. Your second question was, what are we doing to improve the communications with the rebel forces? I have to be frank and say it is not for us trying to protect civilians of whatever persuasion to improve communications with those rebel forces. I can see what your point is of how do you avoid knocking out TNC tanks that we hadn't previously seen in that respect. But I think I'm secure in that in saying it's not for us to improve the communications. What we have to do is we have to see very clearly where civilians or civilian population areas are being attacked, and then make sure that we can either take action, or if we can't take action, it's because we might cause collateral damage in that respect. So that's my answer to that question, I think, of we need to make sure where there is action, we know where it is, that we can protect the civilians. In your first question on civilian casualties, I think the best answer to that, in trying to be very precise, is to ask NATO HQ to come back up with an answer to that and follow up that. Because there is a danger that any answer I give now could be out of date by the time I gave it in that respect. So what I'd like to do is hand over back to NATO, or not hand the question back to NATO HQ, but to say that's something we'll come back to you on that. Thank you. Next question, please.